Hello everyone, my name is Bonnie Sigmund. I'm the horticulture agent for the Laurel County Extension Service. Today I'm going to be putting together a vegetable gardening little video. We're having to change the way we deliver our programming because of this COVID-19. We're no longer able to hold classes or meet together. So I thought I would do a series of little videos that I could put on the web page and on Facebook. We're going to start with the very basics, and then we're going to go on into more detail, finishing up with details on specific crops and tips to help make your garden more productive. Okay, this one is the Valandre in France. This is what a lot of people think of when they think of gardens. This is a very formal, very intricate, complicated garden that is very well maintained and taken care of. This one is Monticello in Virginia. It's more of a not quite so formal garden, but it looks like it's very large, very well maintained, and very productive. In reality, this is more of our garden reality right here. It's a small backyard garden. This garden does have several things that we can take note of. One being the tomatoes are all nice and tied up and staked. A few rows of corn, and of course we have our fence to keep out the rabbits and the deers and other critters that like to go in and eat on our garden. The other thing about this garden is its proximity to the home. That will play a big part in how well that garden is taken care of. There are several advantages of growing a garden. Of course, it's a good hobby and it provides a lot of exercise. And right now, with our children out of school, it gives them something to do, gives them a chance to get their hands into the dirt. You can do several little experiments that you can do in the garden, science type experiments that will go right along with their homeschooling. Of course, there's a lot of satisfaction in growing something that's useful. You're going to be growing your own fruits and vegetables. That is something you can take a lot of pride in. It's also a lot easier to get children to try different fruits and vegetables when they've had a hand in growing them. Of course, it saves a lot on our grocery bill. This year, I have noticed it seems like since this COVID-19 prices are going up on a lot of the groceries that we purchase. All ages can participate. Anyone of any age can participate in gardening, whether it be just sowing the seeds in the spring, pulling weeds during the summer, or picking. There's a lot of varieties that you can grow for your own that taste much better than what you purchase in the grocery store. A lot of those varieties that you see in the grocery store are varieties that are made to handle being shipped. They're made to be so that they have a longer shelf life. They're more stable. The trade-off with that is a more stable shelf life usually have a little less taste. They're not quite as tasty as the heirlooms that you can grow in your own garden. Here is a tale of two gardens. We've got a good garden and a not so good garden. One of the first things that I seem to notice is the rows in the not so good garden are not quite straight. That's not going to have a big deal to do with the garden not doing well just because the rows aren't straight. Probably this garden that is the good garden has probably had a lot more maintenance. It's probably been taken care of a lot better. The soil has probably had a soil test and the fertility's been checked. It's just probably been taken care of much better. This is the basics of vegetable gardening. These are the sections in the little videos that we're going to cover. We're going to do one over most of these. Some of them will be combined into one if they're a smaller section. Today we're going to be doing site selection. These videos are going to be done in order, but if you come in and catch one of these little videos, the second or third one, you'll be able to go back on my Facebook page and start from the beginning, or you can hop around from one to the other as you need. Today we're starting with site selection. These are the things we're going to cover today: the soil, the sunlight slope, proximity to the house, the freedom from traffic, and size. Soil. That's one of the most important things. We want to have a deep soil. You want one that's of medium texture, not too sandy and not too clayey, well drained and fertile. The well drained part, if you can tell, of course, by the garden below, it has got water standing in it. That's not a well drained garden. That is a problem that can develop over time. If you've got a garden that has had heavy traffic or that has been tilled to the same depth several years in a row, you can develop what's called a fragipan underneath your topsoil. Basically what it is the tines of our tillers have beat that soil to that same depth every time. Everyone knows what happens if you have high clay soils and you walk over them continually. It kind of gets like a concrete feel to it. That's a fragipan. That can happen underneath your topsoil if you till to the same depth, or if you have a real high compaction area where you have a lot of traffic or a lot of machinery that's been moved over that part of the garden. If you have something like this, of course it holds water when you have lots of rain so that the water cannot go down, but also during the hot part of the summer, it also creates a barrier so that that groundwater cannot come up from real deep down in the soil, so the plants aren't going to be able to access that deep reservoir of water that they need whenever it gets really, really dry. So you've got a couple of options on how to deal with that. You can find someone who has a plow that could plow your garden down deeper than what you have been going. Or if you have someone or know someone who has a subsoiler, which is basically a shaft that just rips the soil, you can get them to come in and rip your soil, like hashway, go across it one way and then the other. That'll bust up a lot of that fragipan. A good way to tell whether you have one, if you start seeing a lot of this water pulling up towards certain spots of your garden, is if you can find a rebar or a tobacco stick. If you can take one of those and you can push it into your soil fairly easy, and then you feel a large resistance so that you're not able to push it any further. If you can take a hammer and you can nail that piece of rebar or tobacco stick on down and you feel it give through a hard layer, you're more than likely have a fragipan. Undesirable characteristics for our garden soil, of course, is places that are real high in clay. That makes the soil harder to work. It stays wetter longer, and it can form really hard clods. And it can also crust over when it rains. If we have a hard rain, it will actually cause the soil to get hard on top, so the little plants have a hard time busting through. A good way to tell if your soil is too wet to work, and this is just a layman's idea of how to tell, because I always get asked questions of how do I know if my soil is dry enough to work. If you can go out and get a handful of soil, you make it into a ball, and you take that soil and you basically drop it down on the toe of your boot. If that soil busts up when it hits the toe of your boot, then normally it's dry enough to work. If it just bounces off and remains intact, you may want to give your soil another day or two to dry out. Problems with a high clay type soil is a lot of times they stay wetter longer, so you miss those little windows that you need to be planting. Lower fertility, so there's not as many nutrients available for your plants. A lower pH, and we'll discuss why pH is more important in the next couple of little videos. And of course it encourages plant diseases. The wetter the soil, of course, the more humid and moisture you have in your garden. A lot of these diseases need moisture and humidity to thrive and multiply. So the wetter the garden stays, you're going to be encouraging more plant diseases. Sunlight. Your garden needs full sunlight in order to be most productive. I'm not saying that there can't be shades, over your garden, at different times of the day, but you need 6 full hours of sunlight for good production. Okay. Avoid trees and hedges as much as possible. I do know there in certain situations, you don't have any choice. But just keep in mind that if you're planting your garden close to trees, that, if you have a 30, 40-foot tree, that you're only looking at half the tree. The other half of the tree is down below the soil. It has roots that are running out 30 to 40 feet from the base of the tree. It requires all those roots and all that space and soil enough to pull the water out of the soil to support that 30 or 40-foot tree. So if you've got your garden around trees and hedges, just realize that they're going to be competing with those trees for water and nutrients in order to grow. Slope. I always laugh at this little picture. If you have this type of rolling ground, you definitely do not want to be putting your garden out on that. Our topsoil is not regenerative. It's not making more of itself. So once we lose our topsoil, we've lost our medium to grow in. I'm not saying you have to be perfectly flat. You can have a slope, just a small slight slope. If you have one that is sloped towards the south, of course that's ideal because it gets warmest quicker in the spring, and of course it dries quicker in the spring. A slight slope also enhances our air drainage. Cold air, which we still have, in April and some in May, colder air will usually flow down to the lowest point. So if you've got a slight slope, a lot of times it will pull that colder air towards the valleys and towards the lower parts of the ground, the soil, and the environment. So you're going to have reduced frost potential and freeze. So that helps whenever, especially with strawberry production and blueberries. Proximity to the house. I do like to see gardens near the home. They are more accessible. You're going to be looking at them more. You're going to be looking out your window at your garden, and you're going to notice whether it needs to be weeded. You're going to see whether you've got a new tomato ripening. You're going to be more likely to go out there and pick that produce and those tomatoes because you're seeing it. I've always said out of sight, out of mind. Gardens are the same way. If you have them out of sight, you're not going to be taking care of them as well. Also, if the garden is closer to your home, irrigation is a good idea. You usually have a water source fairly close. We do have large windows of drought here in Kentucky sometimes, 2 and 3 weeks worth. And a garden takes about 1 inch of rain a week. So it's much easier to just hook up to a water source and put out your soaker hoses or, water by hand than what it is to carry water to your garden that is, say 2 miles down the road. Of course, physical protection, less rabbits, less critters coming in and damaging your garden if it's closer to your home. And you're able to frequently harvest. You're able to go out there and pull 2 or 3 green onions for supper or a tomato or 2. So you're going to be using that produce much more efficiently if it's right there at home. Freedom from traffic. Try to locate your garden in spots where there's not a lot of traffic, away from play areas, away from animals, away from your dogs, cats. We do want to try to keep dogs and domesticated animals and wild animals, for all that matters, out of your garden as much as possible, because anywhere you have animals, of course, you have the potential for feces and contamination of your vegetables. So we need to try to keep those as far away as possible from our vegetable gardens. I always laugh at this little slide. I'm going to read you the little thing over here at the corner. It says, Hopkinsville, Kentucky, a local man found strangled with a zucchini vine. Neighbor arrested and charged with the crime. Says, I told him many times to stop leaving zucchini on my porch. If you've ever grew a garden, you know zucchini is one of those that is extremely prolific and can grow overnight. So that is usually one of the things that most people are trying to give away to neighbors. When it comes to selecting your garden, the size, I prefer people to start with a smaller garden if they've never gardened before, simply because if you have a large garden and you get behind on care of that garden, you're going to be disheartened and you're going to give up. I'd say a smaller garden that is well taken care of can produce a lot more produce than a large garden that has been neglected. So start small, grow the things that you like to eat. If you don't like to eat it, then by all means don't plant it. But always leave some room to try some different things. Especially if you have children, it's always wonderful for them to try different vegetables and different recipes. The other link is the Home Vegetable Production Guide, which is, I believe, one of the best publications that UK has over vegetable production. It's called ID 128. It starts from site selection and goes basically through asparagus to watermelon. How to produce those, how much to put out for a different size family, when's the right time to put those in the soil. It is just a wealth of information. So you can get those and you can put in those addresses and pull those up, or if you would like, you can call our office, 606-864-4167. We are answering phone calls right now, and we are leaving publications and requested information out in our foyer so that you can pick them up and not actually be face to face with anyone with this COVID-19 threat. We're having to redesign how we do our day-to-day functions. We are still going to be taking in soil samples though in through the front door. We have directions on how to fill out the sheet that tells us what you're growing and things, but we're still taking soil samples because that is definitely a necessity for anyone who is trying to grow a garden or anybody that's doing commercial agriculture. Well, this is going to end this little section of our little video series. Hopefully I'll have sections 2 and 3 done within the next week. And again, if you need anything from our office, don't hesitate to give us a call, 606-864-4167.